You shall. We're live. Let's go ahead.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Steve Bell, and welcome to the latest installment of Ask the Expert. I work for Accenture Technologies, and I'll be walking through a couple of step-by-step examples on more advanced workflow techniques. Please post your questions on the community, and I'll answer them at the end of the demonstration. Okay, so the first thing I want to show is the stats screen, show that I actually am using Helsinki. This is my personal instance that I upgraded for the purposes of this demonstration. So how do you get at this is stats and stats. So pretty simple stuff. And then up here on the build tag is your indicator as to what version you're actually working with. All right. So the first example I want to go through let's see here, find my examples, is using an advanced if activity. So here's go to workflow, and we'll be going to workflow editor. So I'll be creating a new workflow. As soon as this comes up, by clicking on the plus button over here in the upper right hand side. As soon as it's finished loading. I noticed a slowdown earlier when I was reviewing all of this with my personal instance, not sure why, running on my machine. That would cause a problem in the front end. And the internet connection is good, so not sure what's going on there. All right, so what we're going to call this here is the advanced if activity. And we're going to be basing this on the global table. The reason for that is that the global table is the only thing that we can actually work with in the workflow editor that activates the start button so that we can actually do in-place development and testing of our workflow. Any other table, and we'd have to actually execute the workflow externally, and we wouldn't be able to walk through and immediately edit our examples easily. So this puts it all in one place, and the global is the best way of doing that. Now the other thing I'm going to do is, because this is a demo, I'm going to just turn off all condition matches. By the way, global is a base level table and has very few fields in it. So I'll go ahead and hit submit. Wait for it to come back here. All right, so give myself a little bit of room here. And in the activities core tab, I'll be dragging out a run script as the first thing. And what we're going to do is just initialize a variable or variables here. This is actually a best practice that I put into most of my workflows. And all this really is a way of initializing variables, or during development logging inbound activity or inbound values that come into your workflow. Here we'll be just initializing a simple variable. I'll call it workflow.scratchpad.trigger. And what we're going to be doing here is giving it a color that it will be using to actually activate part of our code in the if condition. The whole point of this is to modify the out-of-the-box if, and in so doing, enhancing the functionality without actually writing code, in the sense of developing a whole brand new if statement or something similar to a switch. So we are going to be writing some JavaScript code to actually handle our condition, but we aren't going to be doing a reconstruction of the if activity itself. So this is actually built-in functionality. So we'll call this thing check color. And you'll notice that we have a set of fields here, but these are all from the base table called global. So really nothing to work with here. In that case, we're going to have to go to advanced. And we'll get rid of all of this because we don't need it. Now, let me take that back. In here is an example that's provided for you that shows you something's, a function or way of utilizing this. We're going to actually be doing something similar. And you notice the answer at the top here. But we're going to be filling in a workflow variable rather than going after the activity.result, which is what this populates. So I'm going to delete that, and we're going to start putting in some code. Now this code is going to be a check of the trigger from that run script activity that we filled in. So we're going to be looking for red, blue, green, that kind of thing. And then also we need to handle as a catch-all anything that comes in that isn't red, blue, or green. So in this particular case, we'll do a workflow.scratchpad.result, and this will be our own result, the script. Now, notice this is not the activity.result answer field. This is our own, and this will be available downstream as well. So if we want to continue working with the results from this particular if activity, we have them available further downstream. That's very useful. In some conditions, you might want to actually react again to a particular color or to a color that was chosen, or for some reason that that was handled by this particular activity. So that's one way of hanging on to the values that come out of this. Activity.result is reset with the next activity. So you lose those. This way you retain them throughout the remainder if you need them. So I believe in encapsulating everything in a function. That's why that example at the beginning was written that way as well. So we're going to create a object. It'll be our results object. I'm going to introduce a bug into this as well for the purposes of our testing. So I'm going to misspell false and make it phase.
One quick question here. It seems an audience member says it's a little fuzzy. Is there any way we can, kind of zoom in a little bit more?
I don't think so. Let me try.
Okay.
A little too far. Hold on a sec. That better?
I'm going to ask the user Sharon on the community if that was fine for her. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So go back over it. This bug right here will cause the failure of the workflow, and I'll show you how to go to the context to see that, and then the fact that you have to kill a hung workflow, and you have to do that manually. Okay, so let's keep going. If workflow .scratchpad and finish it. One thing I want to point out is JSUtil is a function library that's built into ServiceNow. It is in the global scope. So if you're using a scoped app, you need to specify global. I usually do this as a habit these days. Okay, so the reason I'm writing this way is because it will allow us to search for the string in a string. Now, normally the trigger would have red, green, or blue, but it's possible to actually do red space green and trigger 2 at the same time. And I'll show you what effect that has. So I'm writing it right now to do parallel. And that will be the reason why I'm not using an if-else-if structure. So I'll do this 2 more times. Now I can gang these up inside of the string, and because it finds that particular value in the string, it will execute this and allow me to do parallel execution. And I'll demonstrate how to do better parallel execution in the next script we write here. So green. Now we have a problem. We have to have some sort of catch-all on the end of all of this in order to handle things that aren't red, green, or blue. And do not neglect this, otherwise you'll get a hung workflow, and really that is not what you want. Hung workflows will hang for the rest of eternity, and will sit out there in your executing workflows queue forever unless you go and kill them. A lot of people don't realize they have a lot of these already having that happen. All right, so we'll get to that here in a moment. All right, so here's our basic code. This little bit right here can be refactored a little bit. Refactoring means to redo it a little bit to take advantage of JavaScript-isms. Since this is a true-false statement right here, we can actually add that in to the result.none without having to do it again. Because if this is true, then we set this to true. Well, let's just steal all this, and we'll rewrite it to say result.none equals this, which results in a true or false. So if all of these are false, this will be true. So now I can comment out these 3 lines right here. And this has the same effect. Now, of course, we want to return something to fill our object, so we turn the result object. I can't even spell. Now in Geneva, they introduced some nice features into the editor. One of those is the object completion feature inside of the editor itself. If you noticed, as I type, the minute I hit period, it actually brings up the various properties inside of my object that I created on line 4. This is only true for objects that I create that are in the editor proper. If it's an object from a script include outside the editor, it will not do this. The other nice thing about this is that this works also for all ServiceNow defined objects, and you have them available to you in the editor. So what's nice here is that it actually will give you the parameters available to you. So some nice features in the editor. The other one is the syntax checker is now built in. This turns it on and off. So they've repurposed the actual icon. It does not do a syntax check per se on your entire code at the point of pushing that button. It now does it automatically and puts it in the gutter right here. The other thing is that you'll notice we have a bug here, and it didn't pick it off in the editor. Well, the reason is because it assumes you know what you're doing, and it only picks off real JavaScript errors, not runtime errors. This one will manifest itself when we actually execute the code. All right, so let's go. Now we got our code written. Let's go do the work on our conditions of the if statement. Okay, let me, since I've got smaller amount of real estate here, let me move this up a little bit higher so it's easier to see. Now I have red, green, and blue, but all I've got is yes or no. So we got to change that. You actually have the capability of modifying these. So I can double click on the yes, and we'll repurpose it to be red. So now we can rename it and call it red. You want to skip during generate. This is for task generation, and we really don't want this to be unchecked. The reasoning behind it is, and you can go look this up in the wiki, but essentially what's going on here is you want all of your conditions to be skipped during a task generation. And in what we're doing right now, what would happen is that it would then halt, if this were unchecked, it would halt at our if statement and actually hang while it was waiting for a task generation to occur. All right, we're going to redo this activity result to our workflow .scratchpad result object. And in this case, we're interested in red, and we're going to be checking to see if it's true. So if this red is true, then this branch will be taken. Say update. Oop, I meant to copy that too. Oh well. So now we have a red. Let's go for a blue. Again, notice that this one out of the box is already set up. No is always set up to be skipped during generate. By the way, I think you can have just one checked and it will work fine, but I like to have all of mine checked. All right, so workflow.scratchpad.result. This was blue, I believe. Yes, blue equals true. Okay, go ahead and update. I'm going to copy this. Actually, probably not necessary now because I'm going to also copy the activities from this point. So you copy an activity. You can copy the code out of an activity condition, but you have to add a new condition. We got by right-clicking. So we right-click the header, and after a couple of seconds, it'll bring it up. It goes off and saves things. Okay, and then you do an add condition to bring up a new condition. And then I'll paste my code in here. So this one's green. During generate. Oof. Green. And we'll set on that one, so fine. Now to do one more to handle none. Okay, those are our 4 condition results. And I'm going to tie all those off onto the end down here. Now, in our run script, remember, we had red is true. So by default, all the others are false since it's a Boolean. So let's go ahead and do a run. And notice how I clicked the start button up here. This, again, only becomes available if you're using the global table. And do a start. And boom, we had a crash. Remember, we introduced an error. And it actually tells us what the error is. Notice it says phase is not defined. Let me get over there a little bit. Maybe it'll show it better. Always out of real estate when I'm this small here. Phase is not defined. It should be false. So, okay, it means we have a problem. Now, this is what's known as a hung workflow. So you probably got a lot of these and don't even realize you have them. Let's jump back over here into our workflow application. And down here is what's called active context. So if we click on this, it'll take a few seconds for it to come up here. What this is going to do is give us a list view of all of our active contexts. If you have a lot of contexts in your system, this goes through and it has to do a query for all the active ones and then bring that up. So if your system doesn't have a lot of workflow contexts in it, this actually is pretty quick. Mine has a lot because I've done a lot of work with a variety of things. All right, so notice executing still. Well, this will go on forever. So you want to make sure that you kill it. So I go into it. Workflow logs, This is actually wonderful. Notice it actually tells us what the error is. I don't have to go to the system logs and try to figure it out. You can write to this using workflow.info, workflow.error, and workflow.warn, which I'll do in the next demonstration. So anyway, go up here to the cancel button and whack cancel because we don't want this one around anymore. Okay, it's canceled. I love the state of canceled. All right, now let's go fix our bug. Super speedy. All right, so let's make false. Also, I want to review my code a little bit and make sure I haven't introduced something else like that. Now it's made me paranoid, right? Everything else looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit update. Notice how that only failed during runtime and the editor didn't notice any of it. So let's go ahead and start again. Start. And ta-da! All right, so let's go to the bottom here and move over. And we chose red, so red got picked and went all the way to the end. Pretty cool. Let's go do another one. So close out the context, get in here to the run. Let's do blue. And I'll do a none as orange, which I can't spell. And I'll comment out these three for now, and we'll show that blue works. So we triggered blue. And now if I trigger orange, it'll ignore these three and go to none. Remember, we must handle a problem, otherwise it gets stuck and it hangs our workflow. So the best practice is always handle your possible problems. So orange. And now we should fire none. There you go. Now, parallel processing. So I want to fire two of these at the same time. Well, I built the code such, let's go back and look at the code again. So it wasn't an else situation. It was an if this, or if this, or if this kind of situation. Come on. So I didn't put any else's in here. So if this is true and this is true, then both of those will fire. Let's go test it out. Notice we only have a single variable we're playing with, but I'm doing an index of on the string. So if we put the value of red and blue into the string, it should pick off both of those and fire them at the same time. So copy this. Just like that. Now, for the sake of our editors, or for someone who's maintaining a code later on, I'll usually use a bar to separate my values on something like this and make them a little more readable, easy to understand. But it's really meaningless as far as our code is concerned, because we're just looking for this string inside of our bigger string. So now when I run this, both red and blue should fire. There you go. Now, the last piece on this is, what if I have orange in that mix? Remember, our check is looking for one of the values being true. So now if I stick orange in here, will none fire? The answer is no. Red and blue will still fire, orange will be ignored based on how we had our code set up. So any value that doesn't fall within the realm of being handled will actually be ignored altogether. Remember, none is our catch-all in case something happened that we didn't anticipate. Any value that's recognized will be acted on. All values that are not recognized will be ignored. So by design. Now you could build a little more sophisticated code that said, we had a value that we didn't understand, which means you'll have to parse that one string apart and handle that in more sophisticated piece of code. But up front, this works just fine. So that's it for the first demo. Were there any questions, Lisa, specifically for that?
I don't see that question posted for that.
Okay. All right. And again, if you have any questions or think of something later on, just throw it in. We'll do the Q&A at the end of the entire next session and be able to answer for both. All right. So let's go ahead and dig into number 2 here. All right. So on this next example, what I'm going to be doing is showing a branch and join. I get a lot of questions on branch and join. It seems to be one of those little understood pair of activities and how they're used and what they're good for and what are the pitfalls of using them and why does it react the way it does and things like that. All are lots of questions that I see with frequency. So I finally got to the point where I created an example lab and stuck it out there. And so what I'm going to be doing is kind of going through that and then showing you some interesting things that are going on with the branch and join live here. So let's go ahead and call this a branch and join demo. Again, we're going to be using the global. And one more time, we're not going to be doing anything as far as triggering the workflow externally. Let it catch up here. Go to core when it gets a chance. Okay, so let's drag this down, give ourselves just a little more real estate. Close this down. So we have 2 activities here under utilities called branch and join. These allow us to do parallel processing and then be able to wait for everything to complete before proceeding further. Extremely important. I've seen a lot of this done because of not understanding how branch and join works. I've seen a lot of it done using timers. Well, timers are impractical because you might go beyond a certain point in time and actually have a cancellation or failure on other branches. I'll get into that here with the demonstration, but let's go ahead and bring out a branch activity. Give it a name like fire multiple branches. For this demonstration, I will use 3 branches. Now this signals to the downstream workflow that there may be 1 or more branches that will need to be tied back together. But for all intents and purposes, it flows through this as if nothing's there. So let's give it something to chew on. I'll create 3 timers. Timer number 1. and we'll use for branch 1. So timer for branch 1. And we'll give it 5 seconds. By the way, you probably never do this. This is to show that there is a delay on certain branches and that there won't be any ties or things like that coming in. So we have branches that are slower than other branches. Drag out another one. We'll do this for 10 seconds. Then we'll do one for, come on, our third branch. Called branch 3. And we'll do 15 seconds for this one. So we have a built-in delay on each of these to actually show that there will be slower branches, because you may have stuff that you're doing on one branch that completes faster than on others. Connect all these up. Now I have 3 branches. 1, 2, and 3 here. Okay, I'm going to connect these all up at the end. Now here's the problem. The way things work inside of a workflow is that if one branch completes before the other two are by design canceled. The only way you can avoid this sort of thing happening is by using the join after a branch has been triggered. Watch what happens. Now the branch is triggered, but for the purposes of this particular stage of the demo, it'll be ignored. And the other 3 will actually fire. So let's watch what happens here. Really speedy today. Okay, so branch number 1 is fired, branch number 2 and branch number 3. Number 1 completed, and when it completed, it canceled the other 2. That's what the color stands for, is canceled. So let's take a look at this real quick. When number 1 completed, anything else that was in process is immediately canceled. So first one wins. And this is by design. The branch was ignored in this particular case because we didn't have a join that could pick off on the fact that it existed. So this is proper behavior. It's not the desired behavior that we want, but it's the proper behavior. So how do we cure this particular issue? Well, we use a join. So drag a join out here. It's acting like I didn't even do it. Come on. Try number 2. It's just going to ignore me. Come on. There we go. Something about my squashed real estate. It didn't like it. All right, so I'm just going to name it something arbitrary like pull together branches.
If you do need to zoom out, the user who was experiencing the fuzziness got it rectified. So if you need to zoom out, just go right ahead.
Hallelujah. There, a little better. All right, so I'll go down here. Now this join, I'm going to wire this up so that the join is the focus of all of these branches. Now you'll notice there's a complete and incomplete functionality in the join itself. Complete means that it was able to rectify all branches out versus all branches in. So if you notice, I have the same number of branches that came out of the branch are now being funneled into the join. They must be the same. So 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. There must be 3 that come in here. It doesn't matter where those 3 come from. That's an important thing to remember. But it has to have only 3. If I were to reduce it by 1, it will mark it as an error and it will fall through the incomplete side. So I'll demonstrate what that's all about here in a moment. Right now, let's just show that this will wait until all branches are complete. Now notice I've went ahead and wired both of these up. If there were a bug in my workflow, incomplete would fire. So start. And go get a cup of coffee. Come on. All right, notice that all three have fired. Okay, now notice what happens. The join lights up. It's now waiting on the other two to finish. Okay, second one finished. And third one finished, and then it allows us to continue. The other nice part about this is we have 3 in and 3 out, so the complete fired. So this is a very well working workflow. 3 branches out, 3 branches joined, and then a completion. This is a way you can debug your code, by the way, because this incomplete will fire if you have an inordinate number of branches coming into the join. So let's go ahead and recreate a bug. Okay, in this particular case, we need some way of creating an extra branch. Well, simple enough. I'll go up here to conditions. And what we'll do is we'll build in a initialize of a variable here at the front. I'll reorder things so it's a little easier to see. Okay, so down here I'll get a run script. I'll drop it in right here. And we'll create an arbitrary variable. Initialize. Can't spell. And we'll call it workflow.scratchpad. Check, and we'll just set it to true. So there's our nice little arbitrary value. I set 2 equals. Tell you, it's been a long day. All right, submit. Okay, so now we have an arbitrary value that we can check further down in our script, in our workflow. Next thing we want to do is look for that value. So we're going to do an if. We're going to throw it on to branch number 3 down here. And we'll call it check, check. Now, notice our workflow variables do not show up in the conditions at all. They're not part of the, a field in the table, which is what the condition builder is expecting. So we go to advanced to actually find this. Remember this? I'm actually going to use this example. So let's uncomment it. And right here is my condition. Now, since check was a Boolean, throw it in there. And this will either evaluate to true or false. If it's true, it'll return a yes, which will be used by answer.result and will cause our condition to fire a yes. Otherwise, it'll be a no and cause the condition to be no. I'll format it so it's a little prettier. And that's our code. This is equivalent to this. But JavaScript shorthand allows us to do this. False in JavaScript shorthand would be the not symbol, but that's very difficult to see at times. So sometimes for maintainability, I'll actually do this, even though the JavaScript people out there who work only in JavaScript would find that to be ridiculous. I consider it a maintenance thing, a good practice. Okay, so now, if you'll notice, we have a yes and a no that come out of here. Well, I'm just going to grab both and throw them into the join. Now I have 4 branches coming into the join, where I started out with 3 coming out of the branch. This is actually a problem, an error, and it will cause incomplete to fire. So let's watch what happens. Remember, the number of things going out of the branch have to be the same going into the join. Go get a cup of coffee. Okay, so first branch finished. Second branch finished. Third branch finished. Notice what happened here. It didn't throw an error, but it went through the incomplete. This is your signal as a developer that something very bad is going on with your workflow, and that the number of branches coming into the join was unequal to the number coming out of the branch. So this is actually an indication of a problem with your workflow, even though no errors were fired. If I go down here, let's hit it again because it should turn blue. You notice no errors. But we did get an incomplete. That's because one of these branches didn't activate. Interesting stuff. All right, so let's go fix that. There's one or two interesting ways of doing this. I'm just going to demo one, and then I'm going to freak you out with the other. So we want this to be funneled back in as 3 different branches. So I'm going to go down here and throw a run script in here, and I'll call it log check. In the previous demo, I mentioned that workflow.info is the preferred method now to gs.log. Let me write a couple of things here. So we have a gs.log. gs.log is not scope friendly. Anything other than global scope, it does not work. So the replacement to that was gs.info. And gs.info is scope friendly. But you still have to go to your system logs and hunt around for your values. Well, there are serious issues with this. First off, I don't know about you, but I've got several hundreds of thousands of records at the end of the day in my system logs, and searching through that could be fun. So what I usually end up doing is I create a couple of things. One is an identifier. Regardless, I want to identify where I am. I don't know how many of you have had mystery gs.log messages sitting in your system log. They have no idea what they came from. I'll almost guarantee you they came from a workflow, and that the workflow didn't have any sort of identifying source. So here's a best practice for gs.log. First off, I can create an identifier value for a context. And in this particular case, I like having this particular set of things around, and I'll explain them here in a second. All right, the first one is the actual name of your workflow. It has a name, and there is a variable filled in for you. The other one is the activity name. Is also something that exists inside of the activity that's currently running. So that pretty much knocks on the head the ability to make this a workflow variable unless you're tacking this onto the end of it. So I usually just make it a local variable at each of my run scripts, so I know where the log is actually occurring. Now you can do a gs.log, and you can say something like check equals or check was, and then you can do a comma and put the source in there. Identifier, and make sure I got the same spelling. All right, so this check right here is workflow. Check. All right, so this is what I would consider a best practice for using gs.log. Again, it's not scope safe, and you have to go hunt through your system logs to locate these things. Usually I put some sort of identifier in the front end of my log statement to go find it or make it easier to find. So this entire thing gets dropped into the message, and this gets dropped into the source. Well, gs.info doesn't have a source, and not only that, I'm not a huge fan of gslog or gsinfo in workflows anymore anyway. Instead, you can do a workflow.info. This works very similarly, and notice, to the gs.info, and gs.warn and gs.error. Same kind of thing, workflow.info, workflow.error, and workflow.warn. All right, so now I have a string and I've got the ability to drop variables in here with variable replacement. So this works very similarly to gs.info. Now I can grab these two. And the identifier will be dropped into my 1 here, and the check value will be dropped into my 0 right here. And this whole thing will go into my context log, which is really cool because the context log is much smaller. And now that I've identified everything, it will actually drop into the log this way. This one will go into the system log. This one will go into my context log. So I hit submit. Now I'm going to funnel everything through that. So poof, poof, and poof. All right, now I have 3 in again. So obviously I'd have a lot of weirdo logic that would go between here and, you know, whatever my business rules are or whatever. But for the purposes of the demo, let's watch this thing actually succeed now. So run, start. Okay, got all 3 firing. 1 finished. 2 finished. And 3 finished. And down here at the bottom, you'll see that it actually went down to complete. So now it's working properly. We have 3 in and 3 out. And the join is totally ignorant of any other branches that were internal. So the join says, I have my 3 in, I'm a happy camper. Now, if we go over here to the workflow context, this is a completed context, so it's not under active. Again, it takes a little while to load all this stuff up. I have a lot of records, okay? All right, so there we go. Branch and join finished. Let's take a look at it. And under our workflow logs tab, we had a failure. Gee, I wonder why that is. You know, we didn't get our info. That's odd. There's a gotcha with it that I did this on purpose for, and I'll show you what happens. Meanwhile, let's go look at the system logs. Now, the nice part about this is notice we did get the value of true in here. And the fact that it ended up being in our logging for the workflow, so it's contained and easy to find. If we go to our system logs, you know, it's hard to find this thing. It's somewhere in here. Well, we have 2 ways of getting at it. One of them is through the source, which was that comma and the source information. And the other one is just by looking for that string at the beginning of things. There it is. And notice it filled this in just fine. Branch and join demo.log check. So I know exactly where it came from. Usually I put a WF in front of that. The value is true. Notice what it did here as far as the workflow. Just calls it an activity. Doesn't tell you where it is. So I always throw my own logging in. All right, so let's go back and fix our code real quick. Now the gotcha and the difference between a workflow.info and a gs.info is that in workflow.info, if you have multiple values, it requires them to be a JavaScript array. So you have to put the brackets around a comma delimited list of values if you have more than one. Otherwise, it ignores everything after the first one, and that's the reason why our 0 value worked. So I'll go ahead and update. Now we'll validate this here in a second. What I'm going to do is rewire my workflow slightly. So now I want timer 2 to actually fire this run script. So I'm going to move this run script over here. And timer 2 is going to hit that. Okay. Now I only have 2 branches in. Well, this is not allowed. It means that I have 3 branches coming out of the join and 2 coming in. So we know that's a problem. Let me blow away this no down here and watch this. I'm going to put it into the join. Okay, now I have 3 branches again. But look how this is convoluted. All right, so timer 2 goes through run script, gets funneled, and comes down to join. Timer 3 on the yes for the if ends up in the run script, gets funneled down to the join, but on the no goes straight to the join. How many branches do I have into the join? 1, 2, 3. This is legal. And the join is actually fooled into thinking it has all branches coming into it. Even though no will not fire, it will still function correctly with a complete. So there's a little oddity here with the actual join that you need to keep in mind, but it allows you to do some strange stuff like this. Watch, we'll fire it off. Okay, we'll wait for it here. Okay, there's 1 finishing. Now remember 2 will funnel through our run script. And we'll end up down. So we have run script actually doing some extra work for us. And there's number 3. Now notice the third one didn't fire, but we got a complete anyway. We started out with firing 3 branches. They funneled down to 3 branches. So join thinks everything's copacetic and it ends up completing correctly. Interesting, huh? It's a legitimate scenario. Actually, I have stuff out in the real world that follows something very similar to this. It's just knowing what the join can do and how it actually functions and what it considers to be a real versus wrong situation as far as ins and outs. All right, so let me go ahead and kill this. Let's look at our, wrong button, and look at our logs. We'll start with the system log first. I'll refresh it. Come on, baby. There we go. And notice that it reflected our workflow.info correctly now. And notice it just says activity. If I hadn't put something in there stating what it actually was, I wouldn't know where this is from. And now let's go to our workflow context. Again, time to go get a cup of coffee, I guess. Go, go, go. I'll go into the branch and join top one here. And our workflow logs, and ta-da! Notice we went through twice because we had 2 different branches, branch 2 and branch 3. So you'd want to put some extra logic in here saying, I'm from branch 1, and the other one, I'm from branch 2, and I'm from branch 3 kind of stuff. And that's it. That's the demo. So we have a couple of minutes here, but again, if you put your questions out, we can answer them after the session has ended.